What's up, guys? Welcome back to Vanover Machine and Repair. In today's video, we're continuing on with the Lucas Gearboxes Part 2. Now, I apologize in advance. This video is very long. There's a lot of explanation, and I cut a ton of footage out to try to make this video as watchable as possible. But the reality is I probably spent 2 or 3 months rebuilding both of those gearboxes just with waiting on parts and stuff going on in the shop. And I tried to condense it down as much as possible. So without further ado, let's jump right back in with part 2. All right, guys, it is the second day, and I'm really excited to say that we got all these gearboxes cleaned out. We have a gearbox over there off camera. Everything turned out really nice. It was super messy. I was drenched wet in grease and kerosene yesterday, but I got a fresh set of clothes on, and I'm happy to come in to some clean gearboxes. Now, once we got all the sludge out, ironically, the damage really is not that bad. All the gears look really good. We don't have an excessive amount of wear. The bearings even look pretty dang good. The only bearings that are really suspect are the bearings that were sort of sitting horizontally, probably because they weren't getting very good oiling, and or debris can sort of fall down and embed itself into the bearing. All the bearings that are stacked vertically, even though they were sitting in a sort of sketchy oil bath, they actually seem to be in fairly good shape. So we're going to leave those bearings alone. Now, as far as modifications or repairs that we are going to do, so repair-wise, on that other gearbox, we already talked about removing that shaft that was worn and replacing that shaft worn area so a good seal can make contact. And we are going to be changing that horizontal bearing, which is similar to this on that gearbox. So for that gearbox, that's pretty much all we're going to be doing, and then replacing the oil sight. And then on this gearbox, pretty much the same thing. All this stays. We are going to be replacing this stack of bearings that is horizontal, and these are the bearings that are notoriously loud on these machines and the ones that Josh needs to change. So I'll make sure to get some good footage of that so that you and he can see what's involved in changing these bearings. And then on this gearbox, we are going to be making 2 modifications. One, the oil drain plug is extremely difficult to get to, and for that reason, I think this wasn't changed. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a 90-degree drop and shooting it out the front so that from the front of the machine, without any disassembly, we can drain the oil quick and easily. And then I am going to be adding an oil sight to this gearbox with a tube coming out the front. And the reason for that is it does have a dipstick, but a dipstick just isn't as good as an oil sight. An oil sight allows you to see the level and the condition of the fluid. And if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And I think with the dipstick and the fact that the oil drain was really difficult to get to, I think it made changing this fluid and monitoring this fluid a little bit more difficult. So we're going to make those adaptations so that way we can be much more likely to monitor the quality of the fluid and the level and change it a little bit more easily. So with that being said, I'll bring you in close and we'll start working on changing the bearings in this region over here. All right, here's a close shot of what we're going to be removing. Now, I looked at the drawing. Thankfully, I have one. It appears there are 2 bearings in here. There's a top roller bearing and a bottom roller bearing. They're not tapered bearings, and I believe we can be lucky enough to extract this out of the top, which would be much preferred because I really don't want to remove this bottom shaft. On the bottom here is kind of hard to see, but there's a bevel gear, there is a Castle washer, and a Castle style nut. And so we need to remove both of those, and there might even be a circlip down here just based on using my mirror, and it is really tight, so I'm not going to be able to show that, but we'll get those 3 items removed, and hopefully we'll be able to pull this out the top and access both of those bearings. It's really, really hard to show. I can barely see. I've been using a mirror down here, and I had to make a custom pick to get that Castle washer off, and I'll show you once we get it out how tight it is. So there's that. Let me see if I can get this. Here we go. You can see how crazy this is. So this is the nut, and one of these tabs, that one there, is folded up, and this is upside down. So you basically have to come in here from the top and do that to pull the tab off. And it is possible. I just did it, but it took me about an hour of messing around because I'm showing you top side, but imagine everything is reversed. So I'm down here with a mirror trying to get this basically in this orientation and then kick up, not push down. And kicking up is hard. You know, I can hammer down, but it's hard to kick up. So we got it. And there's just enough room where once you work it loose, you have to like vibrate the shaft up because this nut is almost touching the shaft. So real tight, but we got it. So that's that. We have a spacer and we have a bearing. Let's see if I can, there she is. If I can grab it. These are the infamous Lucas noisy bearings, all right? Definitely heard worse. But yeah, we'll see if we can source these with that snap ring groove. And then there's one on this other piece right here. There she is. Blind seal, there's nowhere to pull from. All right, moving on to this gearbox. I know we touched on this briefly, but this area here is pretty worn out. I measured the top where it's not worn, and that is a nominal dimension. I don't remember. I think it was like 2 3/4. And this area here is undercut like 40 thousandths. And because of that, I want to go ahead and address that so that way we're not leaking fluid and chips and any debris into this gearbox. And that's what kind of started this whole thing. In addition to that, this bearing is pretty rough, and so I wanted to change that as well. But in order to do that, we had to pull this gearbox out and come to the bottom and remove a cap on the bottom so we can pull this shaft out. So I'll get you down below and we'll get that cap pulled off. Finally, about 30 hours later, we get to remove the one part that we wanted to in the beginning. There she is. So this is the bearing shot, and this is the shaft that's worn. You can probably see it. All right, we got the parts out and cleaned up, and here's what we're working with. So this is the shaft. We have some wear right here. This bearing went underneath right there. This bearing is the reason why we tore both gearboxes apart. Look at this. So that bearing's bad. And then these two bearings sat down in the hole but come up from the bottom. This ring gear sits on top of these guys like that. And these bearings aren't much better. So we're replacing those guys, and we should be set on this gearbox. There it is. See, it does work. Yay. Well, we got all of our holes drilled and enlarged and tapped for 3/4 NPT. Now the main reason I did that is because these were filled with gunk and that gunk had a hard time draining due to neglect. So since we already have these gearboxes out, I wanted to take a couple extra hours and enlarge the 1/2-inch drain plugs to 3/4 so we could have better flow. That way if we have any chips or metal shavings or paint flakes, they're less likely to get caught up in that small little drain. And then of course we added an extra hole here for the oil sight because we're switching over to that as opposed to a dipstick so we can see it and be more on top of it. We also added some holes in the casting where this sits down into so that way we can access the drain plug from the front of the machine and the oil sight from the front of the machine as well. And in terms of the actual draining, Josh Topper reached out to me and advised that I grab a couple of these and make my drain plugs out of these hydraulic fittings. That's what he has on his lathe. This is a great idea. I bought these. I was intending to use them. We can mount this basically to the gearbox, have a hose, plug it in, and it drains, and then when you unplug it, it seals. I'm not using these because I realize they probably work well for his equipment because it's newer, but with this being an old piece of equipment, we have a 3/4 inch hole, but it significantly necks down on the back, and it's really likely that some of my paint chips could get caught in there, and so we're just going with an old school pipe plug. But that is a great idea, and maybe on one of the newer machines where the gearbox might be a little bit cleaner, I'll utilize that. Now in terms of bearings, I've been waiting a couple weeks and I got all my bearings and my seals in. I'm not going to give you a step-by-step on replacing them just because we're trying to keep this video reasonably short. I'm sure it'll be long anyway, but we're going to be replacing all the bearings we talked about. Most of these bearings that are facing up will get changed. I have some new seals, so I'll kind of give you a brief walkthrough of changing that, and then hopefully we can get these gearboxes back into the machine because it's been several weeks, probably almost a month since they've been out, and I'm anxious to get everything back in, get the belts on, fire everything up, and see if it runs a little bit quieter. So with that being said, let me start over here by replacing these two bearings, and we'll go from there. All right, we got these bearings in, only took 3 or 4 hours. The hard part about this is just getting everything aligned and then getting that nut and retainer ring on, but we did get it on and everything's good there. So we have a seal we need to install here and then we're done in this gearbox and we can move on to the lid. Well guys, we got the gearbox in. I apologize if that looked a little unusual or sketchy. The main reason here is I wanted to bolt the cover to the top of the gearbox and move it as one piece. When I removed it, I didn't really know how it was going, so I removed the top first. And on the top, we don't really have a great way to grab this. So really, I didn't want to drop it, and I didn't trust the magnet. So I slung it, got it in place. Once it was in place, I had to take the slings out, block it, and then we used the magnet. And that way, if the magnet failed, I had the blocks under there. I really didn't want to trust slinging this 2,000-pound piece with the top and the bottom all the way around my shop and drop it. So it was a little weird, but we got it in. We got it dropped down. It's heavy stuff, man. Sometimes you just got to work it. So we got it in. Everything works. Everything spins nice. The next step is to focus on this gearbox. And this gearbox will be a little bit more involved because we got a little bit more bearings and seals to replace. But for the most part, everything is good over here. I do need to get these covers on and get our switches in there, our brushes rather, for our clutches, the two old ones and then the new one. Our holes on the front, which you probably can't see, they line up perfect. So I'll be able to take a pipe and basically stick it all the way through and screw it into the gearbox, NPT, and that's going to work out really, really nice. I'm going to be able to come over here and basically undo a drain plug and drain it right here instead of trying to like fish my way underneath. And that's important. At least it's important to me, especially since we did a lot here. I want to be able to put some fluid in, run it for a little bit, flush it, you know, do the same thing over and over again. Even though it is clean, some stuff's going to fall out. And I want to be able to do that process efficiently in the short run and in the long run. So that'll be nice. So otherwise, we're going to move on to the other gearbox. All right, we're moving over to the second gearbox, and we got some parts we need to work on. So this is the sealed journal for the seal. See how nice and loose it is? Let me just pull it off. So you can kind of see, I don't know if it's obvious in the video, but it dips in here where the old seal was wearing. It's probably about 30 to 40 thousandths on one side, so 60 to 80 in total. So we want to come in here and basically machine this off, weld it up, and machine it back down. I'm doing this because this shaft sits vertically, and any debris and dust can basically enter the top gearbox through this seal. So if we left it like this, a lot of our hard work would be for nothing. So we're going to come in here and MIG weld this up. You could also TIG weld this. I'm just doing MIG for the time, and it's not super critical because it's just a seal journal. And then we're going to clean up this. This is just for me, you know, doing guerrilla during disassembly because I didn't know how things went. But now that we know what's going on, we're going to get this cleaned up, make everything look nice, and it should be real good. So we're going to get this over the lathe. Before I weld, I like to machine down if possible. A lot of times when you have something rubbing, it burnishes it, and so the steel has like a little bit of a case harden or just kind of a weird texture. So we'll clean it up first, we'll get good weld, and then we'll go from there. All right, guys, I lied, as I often do, about taking a shortcut. MIG welding, totally fine, was definitely going to do it, but I want to practice my TIG, and I want to practice this new semi-automated setup, so we're TIG welding it. I'm not going to review this setup. We'll do a whole video on it. I know I'm going to get questions, but I'll give you a wide shot as we get started, and then once we light up, I'll zoom you in and turn the ND filters up so you can get some nice arc shots. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get this TIG welded. The main reason, aside from just practicing, is the corners, I want to keep them somewhat crisp. TIG welding will allow me a little finer control so I can come in there and build up the edge a little bit better than MIG. Would have been fine with MIG, but yeah, let's jump right into it. 140 amps is what we're starting with. Kind of go from there. We're using pulse, 1.6 seconds. At 60%. Well guys, that turned out really, really good. TIG welding takes a long time, but the result is worth it. At least in some situations. We got our seal journal remachined and everything turned out perfect. It's within a thousandths of where it needs to be. You can see the seal fits nice and tight as it should. And while we were in the lathe, we went ahead and just cleaned up this face from all those ding marks. It's not really necessary, but it's just going to look a little bit nicer. This is the part that kind of stares at you when you look at the gearbox. So now it's going to look nice from the top. We went ahead and cleaned up a couple of these other parts as well that stick out. Same type of thing here. These were painted and damaged. We just machined them down, made them look a little nicer. While we're out of the machine, it's 5 minutes on the lathe and makes a big difference. The other thing that we went ahead and did is we just made sure all of these splines are free moving. We don't want any burrs on those, and that all of our threads engage properly. The last thing you want to do is go to assemble this and realize some of these threads were damaged. We want to make sure all that is done ahead of time. It just makes assembly simple. Now in terms of bearings, we're using a variety here. We have some Timken, we have some NTN, we have some Nachi, and then we have some Garlock seals and some Federal seals and a couple other seal brands. So let's get this thing put back together, and we're going to start out with this shaft first. we went ahead and got the rest of the shafts installed, and we did a little bit of work off camera that I want to just bring you up to speed on. Now, you've seen us weld and machine down this seal journal here. We ended up doing that on 4 different seal journals. Fairly time consuming, but I think is worth it, and I just wasn't going to show that. It's very repeat stuff. We did that on this shaft, that shaft, and another shaft over there. Similar issues where the seal journal was worn or had some scratching. I'll throw some pictures up just showing what that is, but we could have chanced it, but at the end of the day, especially down here low, I didn't want to go ahead and do all this work and have my gearbox leak. And in fact, originally I installed the seal as is and took that piece and filled it with some oil, and it was leaking immediately. So that told me that as soon as we filled this gearbox full of oil, it was going to leak down at the bottom, and I just didn't want that. So I took the time to back up and redo that one and a couple of the other ones just to make sure we're not losing any fluid. Each gearbox is designed a little bit differently. This gearbox has a lot of holes and protrusions, and they use seals. Seals are a really good method, but if the journal is smoked, then it's just going to leak like crazy. So I wanted to make sure that was dialed in. Went ahead and got this gear installed, pretty straightforward, and then the 2 side shafts and seals over there, as well as on the top. We went ahead and got this guy installed, but pretty straightforward stuff. So we're ready to take the lid, get it back on, and hopefully get this guy in the machine. Just kidding, guys. I realized that this top has to go on with it in the machine. I could probably cheat it, but there's some dowel pins that align the bottom gearbox in the housing, and those dowel pins go in from the top of the bottom gearbox, and you can't get them in with the lid on. So even though this would be easy here with the crane, I'm going to get the bottom gearbox in first, and then when that is done, we'll lower the top on it. Remember this shaft at the beginning of the video? Turns out this shaft is designed to slide on that shaft, which it wasn't before, which means you can get this in and out without removing that gearbox. We know that now, but in the beginning, that's why I ended up removing that gearbox, because of this shaft. So with that being said, I'm going to just get this in place. And once it's in place, all we have to do is slide that shaft over and pin it. And that makes removal of this easy. It's funny, sometimes you don't realize that stuff because it's covered or it's not. In this case, it was binding and it wasn't sliding properly. But hey, you learn in retrospect, right? That's how it goes. Here are these large pins I was referring to and the reason why we took the lid off. This just aligns the gearbox. All right, just wanted to briefly mention when we took this out, I damaged one of these brushes. These brushes are $600 from Lucas. I was able to get this one for $175. It's already installed, but I just wanted to mention that. And when I took the plate off, basically this was like this, and it was full of oil. So some fluid came up from the gearbox and basically came in there. So I went ahead and just printed a 3D printed thing, and I just put some text on it. That way someone in the future knows what they're doing under here, because I didn't know what was going on until I was looking at the wiring diagram. So we'll put this cap on, and I'm just going to put a little bit of RTV in there, and that'll keep the gearbox fluid out of that electrical component. And then this is where the dipstick used to be here. I've just plugged this up. I figure this panel is easy enough to remove. We can just remove the entire thing and fill it, and we have our oil sight on the front. So let me get this cap on here and then this plate on. While we're doing this, I just want to mention that I didn't really talk about the wiring on this machine. Wiring's kind of boring to go over, and I did end up redoing all the wiring to all of these brushes and other switches in this area that I had to touch. But it's kind of hard to film that and explain it. So just so you know, all the wiring to everything you're seeing has been replaced, and new terminal connectors have been put on. All right, here's a better look of the oil sight and drains that we added. A lot of additional work, but I think it's well worth it. Over here, instead of the dipstick, we're doing the sight view, which we can see from the front. And the drain is going to be down there, as opposed to trying to reach myself all the way under here. We're going to make this look good, obviously. You know how I roll. I'm going to be replacing this aluminum plate. I'm actually going to extend it past where it was. Here's the line where it was. And then we're going to do a circle cut out here. And then down at the bottom, I think I'm going to do like a half corner for this oil drain. And then I would like to have some text that says drain, oil sight, and then has our markings. But that's going on over here. On the other side, same deal. We added a drain plug. That'll be really easy to drain. We're going to make a plate here. I'll get these laser cut out of stainless. We'll put a hole there. It'd be nice if we have like oil and maybe an arrow up. And then we added this drain sight here, and we tapped it. A little bit extra work, but the main reason is the tap-in sights like I have up top. They do leak, and when they go bad, they're kind of a pain to change because you got to tap them in and like fish them out. These are really nice because they seal great, and if I damage them or if there's an issue, I just unscrew it, screw another one in, life's good. And that's a lot more standard and cheaper and easier to come by than the press-in ones. So that's the the game plan on the oil. Electrically, we need to figure out what's going on there. Everything works with the levers, but we have the headlock and the table lock, which doesn't work, but we'll be getting into that in a future video. I think we're finally ready for what everyone has been waiting for. Let's fill both of these gearboxes full of oil, and let's get this guy running. Maybe it's just me, but I find this really satisfying to know that everything is nice and clean. We got our screw-in funnel here, so we're not going to make a mess. And in the future, changing the oil is going to be easy, so it's going to allow us to want to do it. It's going to be easy to drain, easy to fill. As far as oil, there's going to be some oil Nazis out there. Using the right oil is important. I don't want to suggest that it's not, but this machine is 70 years old, and what was in there was mud. And so most machine tools use a form of hydraulic oil. If it's your baby machine, get the right oil. Most of my machines, I just run whatever's cheap hydraulic, meaning a 32 or a 24 or 56 or whatever, whatever the numbers are, whatever I can get a deal on. I actually found $26 for a 5-gallon at, I think it was Tractor Supply. It was on sale, so I bought 6 of them. So that was dirt cheap. Those are usually 2 or 3 times that cost. And in this case, it's always better to have clean oil that's slightly off on weight than dirty oil of the right. And so everything is going to be nice and clean in here. We're going to run all these gearboxes once, and then I'm going to refresh the fluid. So I'm not too worried about it on the first fill. But yeah, so we'll probably put like 10 hours on the machine and then drain everything. So yeah, let's fill this guy up. All right, here we go. There she is. Not the most precise pour there because I couldn't see the sight. All right, that was just shy of 5 gallons, maybe 4 gallons. That's a decent amount. Did spill a little bit, just because it's hard for me to pour 5-gallon. Number 2, I'm going to remove this whole cover. We'll finish off this one, but I know this is going to take like 5 gallons. Well guys, it's time to get this guy running and see how she sounds. The table and saddle are not connected because I need to do some work on those, and I still need to complete this area up here. Just need to swap out a gear. But other than that, for the most part, everything should run. We're really just testing the gearboxes and the sound. I'm running on 1 belt currently. We had a little bit of fiasco with gates, and I've been waiting on those belts for a couple months. We're ordering new belts, and they'll be here on Monday. I have the other belts, but they're pretty greasy, so I cleaned one up just so we could run one. Yeah, so let's fire this up, see how she does. Motor on. Pretty quiet overall. Let's see. Okay, so we have an issue there. Probably a limit switch issue. Not bad. Not bad at all. Just kind of works. It's quiet. I mean, this machine's gonna make some noise, but overall, I think it's 20, maybe 30% quieter than it was before. So hey, that's a win. And obviously our gearboxes are clean, and we had made some modifications, like we changed out one of the brushes, and we added the oil drain sights and drain plugs, and did a myriad of other bearing and seal replacement. So overall, I could not be happier. I'm gonna run it in a little bit more, and we're gonna move on to the next step, which is working on this table. Now this table, like everything else, I'm sure will be a complete disaster. There aren't as many moving parts, which is good, but we do need to get in there. There's an oil pump that I'm sure is ripped out or not working, so we need to tackle that. But overall, I'm gonna call this area mostly done. My hand wheel is already printed and it's good to go. I do need to make the plate for that. I gotta replace this plate. I'm printing out a placard here, and I need to get this piece of sheet metal rebent. I'll probably do cut send on that for a piece of stainless because it was mangled in the move. And the same thing for the back piece, and some way wipers and some small stuff. But for the most part, I think we're mostly done over here, which is really exciting. So I know this video has been long. I tried to be somewhat thorough without boring you guys too much, especially since Josh wants to change those two bearings. Hopefully this video will kind of help him out. If you guys enjoyed this content, let me know down below, and we'll see you in the next one.